offer an exclusive look at the controversial and unflinching Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, why the president stands by him, what drives the 74-year-old Rumsfeld to soldier on, why he fights. What Eisenhower was most worried about 45 years ago,
these evil men, the powerful Politburo,
wasn't the military-industrial complex, but the threat of communism.
That has already enslaved 800 million souls, with the world its ultimate goal.
Ike spoke of the communist threat in terms that largely captured for Donald Rumsfeld the Islamic terror threat today.
We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method.
To meet it successfully, we must carry forward steadily, surely, and without complaint the burdens of a prolonged and complex struggle with liberty as the stake.
By invoking Ike's words last February, Rumsfeld underscored his and President Bush's belief that the war on terror is no Vietnam, but more like the Cold War.
Out of Iraq now! 1 million reasons!
But the comparisons between Vietnam and Iraq persist.
Donald Rumsfeld, the war criminal.
So I asked the Defense Secretary about them last winter.
Greetings, how are you, Brett?
After he met with President Bush at the White House.
But I think that there's a whole cluster of people in our country, a lot of them in the journalism business, who had much of their lives formed by the Vietnam War, and so it's understandable that they would try to relate everything that happens in the 21st century to what they experienced in the 20th century. That doesn't make it accurate or apt.
But when somebody brings up Vietnam, do you get frustrated with the...
Oh, I don't get frustrated at all. I get determined.
In Rumsfeld's 50-plus years of public service, he's been the model of determination. When Ford lost in 1976, Rumsfeld went into private business and became one of the nation's top CEOs. All the while, he watched America's most dangerous threats shift from the Eastern Bloc to the Middle East. 1979, the Islamic Revolution in Iran led to the 444-day hostage crisis. A disastrous rescue attempt made Rumsfeld realize the Pentagon was not prepared to counter this new enemy. 1983, an Iran-backed terror cell bombed the Marine barracks in Beirut, killing 241 Americans and forcing a U.S. retreat from Lebanon. After the bombing, President Reagan asked Rumsfeld to be his Mideast envoy. In that capacity, he shuttled throughout the Mideast, even meeting the man who 19 years later would become his biggest foe, Saddam Hussein. In 1985, Rumsfeld became one of the first U.S. politicians to equate terror attacks with war, and to warn that even the U.S. homeland was not safe.
He was trying to alert the American public to the idea that this is a new threat, and a new kind of threat.
Rumsfeld biographer Midge Decter.
He went so far as to say, we would have to hit the terrorists where they are in order not to be hit by them where we are. And I suppose that the audience at that moment was completely unmoved by this point.
Americans continued to be largely unmoved even as the attacks against the U.S. increased in frequency and severity. But everyone did get the message on September 11, 2001. On that day, Donald Rumsfeld, serving an unprecedented second term as Secretary of Defense, was on the front lines of the attack, and this time would play a key role in how the U.S. would respond. Rumsfeld's second time around, the Soviet Union was history, but another threat had been gathering on America's horizon. 1993, the first World Trade Center bombing, 6 dead, was handled as a law enforcement matter. 1996, terrorists in Saudi Arabia truck-bombed a U.S. Air Force residential compound, killing 19 Americans. Another murder investigation. 1998, Al-Qaeda simultaneously blew up 2 U.S. embassies in Africa. This time, President Clinton did respond with missile strikes against bin Laden targets in Sudan and his training camps in Afghanistan. The damage, however, was largely symbolic. 2000, Al-Qaeda blew a hole in the USS Cole. killing 17 Americans. This time, the U.S. military did not respond at all.
So if you were a fairly sophisticated student of national security, you knew the general shape of the war that we now find ourselves in. And Rumsfeld was an extraordinarily knowledgeable student when he walked in that building.
President Bush wanted Rumsfeld to transform the Pentagon, to make the military quicker and more agile. But Newt Gingrich says big changes in a time of peace were never going to be easy.
I was working with Rumsfeld in the summer of 2001. It's hard to go back to that world and realize how different it was. We were wrestling with the problem. How do you get across to the Congress and the American people that the world is dangerous?
Rumsfeld was criticized personally because he pushed his generals hard to put his ideas for a faster, lighter military into action.
In Afghanistan, the Army had a model. They wanted to send 5 or 6 divisions. The President, the Secretary of Defense said, this is nonsense.
Newt Gingrich says Rumsfeld had the better plan.
The combination of American air power, American special forces, local allies, with a force that was 5% of the Army plan. They defeated the Taliban in a matter of weeks. This is a genuine leader in the historic sense. And all good leaders know that you move to the sound of the guns.
Within weeks, the sound of American guns would be heard in a place no one anticipated: Afghanistan.
Some people are comparing Iraq to Vietnam and talking about a quagmire. How do you answer the Vietnam comparison?
Yeah. I think the analogy is false.
But that Vietnam-era Q word kept flying.
And the idea of calling it a quagmire is flat wrong.
So when you hear people say, we won the war, but we lost the peace.
Oh, that's nonsense, that we lost the peace. There were people saying we lost the war after we were in it for 3 days.
But the post-war was not so neat. General Van Riper blames that on Rumsfeld's insistence on fewer troops.
You're the 8th general to come out and call for Secretary Rumsfeld to step down, but you're the first general to do it after President Bush said that he's my man. He is staying in the Pentagon. What are you trying to accomplish by doing this?
Recall now, I haven't come out and called for his resignation. That's the President's decision.
You don't think this debate threatens the civilian leadership of the military? Does that hurt the war effort?
There are more than 7,000 retired generals who have not criticized the Secretary.
Is it easier to get in this time to Iraq than it is to get out of it?
It is always easier to get into something than to get out of it. On the other hand, it's always easier to do nothing than to do something. And
is that another rule?
Hundreds of thousands of Americans have gone to war, a huge burden for any Secretary of Defense, which made me wonder about Rumsfeld's faith. I raised the subject in that car ride back from the White House.
You know, we've talked many times over the past 4.5 years, and we've even done this behind-the-scenes thing before. But I have never asked you this question.
Probably with good reason.
You know, we've heard President Bush talk about his faith and how it factors into his job. I've never heard you talk about yours. Are you a religious man?
Well, we are. Our family is.
You were 13th Secretary of Defense. Were you in this office?
Yes.
How many steps to that?
God, it's terrible. I bet you I don't have 1,500. 1366.
1366, 10,000 is the goal?
Yeah.
How do you want history to remember you?
Oh, I don't even think about it.
Yes, you do.
No, I don't.
Come on.
I don't.
The history books, when years from now.
I won't be around to read them.
Somebody will.
That's fine. Let them read them. No,
you have to think about legacy a little bit.
I really don't. I think about doing what I'm doing, and I live full days. I get up early. I stay up late. I feel happy to be doing. In fact, I feel fortunate to be doing what I'm doing. To be able to be involved in something as important as this at this moment in our country's history, I think is something that I feel fortunate to be involved in.